Carolina. He is the chair of the Senate Committee on the Judiciary. And so with so much going on back home in Washington, D.C., where I also live, it's great, it's extraordinary, and a pleasure to know that he is here at the forum. He is one of the top US Republican senators, and I suspect that he too needed a break from US politics and had to fly all the way to Doha to get that bit of respite, just to switch off a little bit. He is Senator Lindsey Graham. He will be making a few featured remarks, and then he'll be joined on stage by Becky Anderson from CNN, who will conduct an interview with him. Senator Graham, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you very much for the kind introduction. I was thinking, I think this is my 58th trip to the region since 9/11. Specifically for Afghanistan and Iraq, where I'll be going later. And I usually came with Senator McCain, and I miss him greatly. I know many of you were friends of John McCain. And I just want to let you know that he's influenced me and many of you, and we'll do our best. But people ask me why I come to the Mideast so much. To get away from Washington. The people are nicer and the issues are easier to understand in the Mideast. So we find ourselves at home in great conflict, but I'm here to tell you, if you wonder what's going to happen in Washington, impeachment will be over probably by mid-January. Personally, I think President Trump will come out of this stronger. And the good news is that everybody in politics in America needs to prove to the American public we're not all completely crazy. So there may be a spirit of compromise coming post-impeachment, born of political necessity, if anything else. What I like most about my country is that we can do many things at once. As we talk about impeachment, we've also reached an agreement on the USMCA trade deal between us, Canada, and Mexico, which will help our economy. Steve Mnuchin has negotiated a budget deal with Nancy Pelosi and Democratic leaders in the House and the Senate, which will make our military stronger. We may have phase one of a China deal coming up here pretty soon. So my point is, as hard as it is to watch American politics now, things are getting done, and when impeachment is over, which will be soon, I think 2020 may be more productive than most people think. To our host, how about a round of applause for everybody who put this on? This is a hell of a forum. Thank you. To our Qatari friends and allies, I want to thank you for the kindness you've shown me over the years, and I want to thank you for taking such good care of our men and women in the military stationed in your country. I've been in the Air Force. I retired in 2015. And when you go to our base here in Qatar, you don't want to leave because every other base is not nearly as nice. And that comes from a dedication from the government here and the Emir personally to make sure Americans are well taken care of. As to the delegation, Morgan, thank you for coming. Morgan Ortagus and Ivanka Trump, I think, make a very good impression for the United States. Ivanka's initiative about empowering women throughout the world economically is the key to stability over time. What have I learned from 58 trips to Iraq and Afghanistan? You're never going to end these conflicts until a woman can have a say about the future of her children. You're not going to kill your way out of this war. I keep telling people back home who have a lot of problems, we need schools upgraded, we need roads and bridges in South Carolina. But being a friend of John McCain, I understand that there is no substitute for America. Our foreign aid budget is 1% of the federal budget. And I say this passionately to my constituents who wonder why I come here so much. What happens here can affect you at home. Remember 9/11. Take your eye off the ball over here and you will regret it. The key to bringing stability to Afghanistan and the entire region is to empower women. I tell my constituents at home, a small schoolhouse built in Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria, you name the place, giving a poor young girl an education, a say about her life and her children, will do more to destroy radical Islam than any bomb we can drop. And I mean that. So I'm here to help Ivanka, and what she is doing is really transformational. Stephen Mnuchin, our Secretary of Treasury, took the time from a busy schedule to come here. He just, I think we've got a budget. God, I hope we've got a budget. For the fact that Steve would come here says a lot about the importance of this forum. So Becky will take a tour around the region. But things to look for in 2020. I'm working with Bob Menendez, a Democrat from New Jersey, to try to find an alternative to the JCPOA. It's one thing to back out of the Iran deal, and I'm glad President Trump did, because I thought it was a bad deal for the region. Thought it was a bad deal for the world. But what are you going to replace it with? So Democrats and Republicans are beginning to think, what would be a good alternative? The first thing I want to suggest is let the people in the region have a say. Don't come from Washington and Europe to fix the neighborhood. Actually get people involved in solving the problem in a way acceptable to them, to the Arab nations, to Israel, and to the Iranians. Here's my basic premise. What would be a better deal? You can have nuclear power, but not a nuclear bomb. Does that make sense? Nuclear power is a good thing. It's a clean source of energy. It's good for the environment. I've never objected to Iran having a nuclear power program. I object to the Iranians enriching uranium given their behavior. I don't trust them. There are 15 nations in this world with nuclear power programs that do not make their own fuel. So I'll make a challenge to our Arab allies. I know many of you want nuclear power. I support that effort. But I think a good alternative to the JCPOA would be a regional agreement where people can have nuclear power, but the fuel will be provided outside the region so that nobody can have a march to a bomb. One of the most well-known things in the region is Israel has nuclear capability. They won't admit it, but we all know it. Think about it. Nobody has felt the need to march toward a bomb because Israel has one. But if the Iranians get one, everybody's going to get one. Whatever you give the Iranians, our Arab friends are going to want the same thing. What if everybody could have nuclear power without the ability to make a nuclear bomb? We'll see exactly what Iran wants. Finally, my goal for 2020 is not only to find a substitute for the JCPOA, but to end the conflict between Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and our Gulf Arab allies. This needs to end. Foundationally, there's legitimacy to everybody's concerns, but the time has come to get this over with, to unite and focus on the way forward. So as I began, this is 58th trip I can remember. The reason I come back so much is because it matters. And I am fighting for a foreign policy that understands America cannot fix everyone's problem, but we're an indispensable player. I've got to know President Trump. It's been a great journey from being his opponent to being his ally. And people ask me what happened. I said, well, I got to know the president. I accepted my defeat. He likes that. I've come to know him. I like him. He likes him, and that gives us common ground. Thank you very much.
Literally just answered one of my questions. Well done. I was going to ask you,
Thank you.
What happened with all of that? Listen, I appreciate that you started with US domestic politics, or at least some reference to it, and I would like to spend some of this time discussing just exactly what is going on. I've done a straw poll of this audience, and they are absolutely fascinated by what is going on in Washington at present. But let's start.
That's one word to use. I wouldn't use that word, but fascinating is the word.
Let's start, though, with US foreign policy, because you've always been one of the most vocal US lawmakers when it comes to US foreign policy, particularly in this part of the world. So let's do a tour, as you suggested. Let's start with Iran, if we can. We've heard a lot of discussion here today about the effectiveness or not of the US campaign of maximum pressure on Iran. Brian Hook has told me recently it will continue until the regime is either transformed into a normal government or sees its economy collapse. You talk to experts in this region, not least the people in Iran who are terrified of that situation. The risk at this point is that is a regime which is emboldened, it is going nowhere. Normality isn't something it is likely to take on. And so, how concerned are you about the risk you run with this policy of maximum pressure?
Well, you have to take the risk you run from changing policy to the risk you accepted by the old policy. The reason I'm glad President Trump got out of the Iranian nuclear deal is because I thought it was a bad deal. There was no requirement to control their ballistic missile program. There was no requirement to stop destabilizing the neighborhood. We gave them $150 billion. They didn't build roads and bridges and schools with it. They empowered their military component. And I think the deal itself is very limited. It doesn't stop their nuclear program. It slows it down. And from a President Obama's point of view, I don't doubt his sincerity because everything we've done before really hadn't worked. So let's try something new. Let's relieve sanctions. Let's put inspectors in. Let's put disassemble some of the centrifuges. That's not a good deal because I don't trust Iran. My enemy is not the Iranian people. My enemy is a regime that's a religious theocracy that I think is hell-bent on dismembering this region, destroying the state of Israel, and coming after us if they can. So the next deal, if there is a new deal, I hope the region will play a part in it. I hope we will ask everybody to be at the table, just not Western nations and the Iranians.
Well, certainly the region appealed for that in the past when the JCPOA was being put together. Brian Hock, in a recent interview with me, specifically told me that the US is not looking for regime change. Are you looking for regime change?
Oh, absolutely, I am, but that's not the policy of the United States. Why do I want the regime to change? They're murdering their own people. They're exporting terrorism. It's the largest state sponsor of terrorism in the world. So here's the question. Why would you want it to stay the same? It's illogical, in my view, to want this regime to stay the same given what they're doing.
So you talk about working together across the aisle, possibly to come up with something that you could offer as a deal to Iran. This is a country that has so far dismissed all of Washington's diplomatic proposals. I put this to you. To your mind, is America's policy of military restraint at present hurting efforts to deter Iranian aggression in the region and get them to the table?
Well, President Trump decided to withdraw from the deal. That was a pretty unified view of the Republican Party. The Democratic Party pretty much supported the deal. But my goal is to replace the JCPOA, if possible, with something more bipartisan. I've talked to a lot of Democrats and Republicans. This idea of having nuclear power without the ability to enrich is a fairly attractive proposition. I don't believe Iran wants a nuclear power program. I believe they want a bomb. Let's test that proposition. What if every Arab nation in the region said, we would accept nuclear power without the ability to enrich? I'm dying to know what the Iranians would say. I'm dying to know what the Europeans would do. So there's a growing sense in Congress that we need to replace the JCPOA. As to President Trump, I think he's committed to the maximum pressure campaign. I think he would sit down and talk with the Iranians under the right circumstance. But rather than the President of the United States talking to the Iranians, maybe we should get the region talking to each other. Maybe the first thing to do is see if people in the region can begin to talk to Iran and see where that takes us.
Well, you make a very good point. What do you understand to be the position of regional players, that of Qatar here on the one hand and the UAE and Saudi on the other, with regard Iran? Are they aligned with Washington at this point, or is there a pivot away from policy?
I think we know what we want to do with a maximum pressure campaign, but I don't think anybody knows how this ends. So what is the goal? So my goal is to replace a bad nuclear deal with a better deal, to include the ballistic missile program in the next deal, and hold them accountable when they export terrorism. So military restraint. When they shot the drone down, President Trump was ready to go for a limited military strike, and I talked to him, and he said the reason he pulled back is if you kill a couple of hundred Iranians, the Ayatollah is going to have to respond, and he didn't want to put him in that box because of a drone. Then they attacked the largest oil field in the world. Iran does attack our allies in Saudi Arabia, and we still haven't done anything. So I like the president a lot, but the one thing that I don't want him to misjudge is that what you call restraint may be seen as weakness. There's going to come a time when you can no longer restrain yourself, because I do not want the Ayatollah and his henchmen to believe that we're weak.
You do have different views on the use of US power. You are more of an interventionist, the US president less inclined to use military force. Are you saying here now that you advocate a military conflict and that you are or will try and persuade him of such?
I do not want a military conflict with Iran, with North Korea, with anybody else for that matter. But I want North Korea to abandon their nuclear program, come up with a win-win deal where we can help develop North Korea for the betterment of the people of North Korea, that they would give up their nuclear program with security guarantees, and there'd be a win-win for the region. As to Iran, I would like to replace the JCPOA with something that's more acceptable to the region, that deals with nuclear power differently than a nuclear bomb. At the end of the day, President Trump, I think, has done a good job of rebuilding our military. He's trying to find a way to end the war in Afghanistan. Count me in. We're down to 8,600 people probably in Afghanistan. I think that works. The Trump doctrine seems to be to have a light footprint, get other people to do more. America first is not isolationism. America first, I think, is becoming burden sharing. It's for others to do more than we do less, for us to reassess these alliances and make sure that it is beneficial to us. We are going to leave some forces in Syria. Had a big debate with the president about that, right? And the goal of leaving these forces is to make sure that the oil resources in northeastern Syria do not fall in the hands of ISIS or Iran, enemies, and that we can develop these resources for our allies. And if you can keep the oil out of the hands of the Iranians and ISIS, they'll never come back and reestablish the caliphate. That's a different reason for being in Syria, but it makes sense to me. It's not to take oil, it's to guard an asset that would allow bad people to get stronger, and we'll develop this asset for allies, the people of Syria.
Senator, I just want to remark that you just said the Trump doctrine seems to be military light or footprint light. That is an issue, I think, that this region has. What is U.S. foreign policy with regard to the Middle East at present? There is a real narrative out there that says that the U.S. is simply an unreliable partner these days.
Well, there was a speech the president gave in Riyadh that I welcomed, that we will stand with you as a region to fight against extremism. As things have developed over time, it's gotten a bit more complicated. If we had abandoned Syria, and we'll talk about Turkey if you'd like, the bottom line here is the SDF forces, the Syrian Democratic Forces, are made up of Arabs and Kurds who align with us. We've lost 8 soldiers destroying the caliphate in Syria, 8 Americans, God bless them. Over 10,000 casualties from the SDF. We provided air power. They've knocked down the doors. They've done most of the fighting. I think that kind of alliance makes sense to me and works. But if we'd withdrawn, the Kurds would have been in a world of hurt. People would have questioned our commitment to them. And I'm pleased to report that I think we have a sustainable policy in Syria where our SDF partners will not be abandoned, that we will play a constructive role to make sure Iran and ISIS that Iran doesn't benefit from a collapse of Syria, and that ISIS doesn't come back.
You name-checked Turkey, so let's do Turkey. It has taken delivery of sophisticated S-400 Russian missiles. What do you believe the consequences should be if those missiles become operational?
We'll kick you out of the F-35 program. To anybody who's looking at buying the S-400 and getting American airplanes, you can't have both. The consequences to activating the S-400 will destroy the relationship between Turkey and the Congress. Turkey is an important strategic ally. They're a member of NATO. If there were a vote tomorrow in the Senate to sanction Turkey for their incursion into Syria and for the activation of the S-400, it would get over 90 votes. It would be veto-proof. To my friends from Turkey, I've gone to Turkey 3 different times in the last year to try to find a win-win. The YPG elements inside of Syria, Kurdish YPG elements, are seen by the government of Turkey to be terrorist organizations aligned with the PKK. I get that. I've always understood the friction. The goal was to demilitarize the YPG elements along the Syrian-Turkey border, to move them back, to give Turkey the security they need by having some monitoring force, but not to require the United States to pull the rug on allies who were there in the ISIS fight. I thought we could have gotten there through negotiation, but when Erdogan decided to intervene militarily in Syria, the Congress has come down on him hard. The House, the one thing that President Erdogan did that nobody else could do was unite Democrats and Republicans. To my friends in Turkey, let's find a way to resolve the S-400 issue. Let's stop the military incursion, create a demilitarized zone that we can all live with, and Turkey is a key player into solving the problems in Syria.
Are you prepared to say that to President Erdogan's face after you were in the room and
I said it to his face.
You said it to
I was in the White House with him. I mean, I went there 3 times. He took me to a classical pianist recital. If you know me, that tells you how much I really want to make this work. I'm not that much into classical pianists, but the point is that I thought we were there, then we're not. He made a severe miscalculation.
You were prepared to block the Armenian genocide legislation in order to get there, were you?
Yeah, but that ship has sailed too. So if anybody hears from Turkey, let's fix it before it gets out of hand.
Let's do Saudi, because this is important. The White House, once again, pushing to remove provisions cracking down on Saudi Arabia from the Defense Authorization Act. Are you comfortable with President Trump's refusal to criticize Saudi Arabia in any way?
I think he did criticize initially. The President of the United States has a different job than I do. He's the Commander-in-Chief. I cannot tell you how many times I've been to Saudi Arabia with Senator McCain. MBS. About 2 or 3 years ago, he came to Washington, honoring the end of the first Gulf War. I introduced MBS. Senator McCain was very close. After Khashoggi, everything is different.
You said at the time, and I quote, the Crown Prince should be dealt with. That was a year ago. A year on, do you still believe that? And if so, how?
Saudi Arabia is a strategic ally. But what happened with Mr. Khashoggi shows a complete lack of respect for the U.S.-Saudi relationship. What happened there violates every norm of civilized society. And if it's ignored, we will live to regret it. So it's one of these situations you have to work through. I'm a member of Congress. Let me tell you where Congress is at with Saudi Arabia. To our friends in Saudi Arabia, your stock is about as low as I've ever seen it. And the only way it's ever going to change is for you to change. So I'm looking for change. Having said that, they're still an ally.
Yeah, but by which you mean what? When I asked you again, a year ago you said the Crown Prince should be dealt with. What do you mean by that?
We should sanction Saudi Arabia for the conduct that I think was sanctioned by the Crown Prince that happened on his watch. That it's not my job to pick who leads Saudi Arabia. It's my job to stand up for what we believe in America and what our values are. And the day that you separate your values from your foreign policy, you'll live to regret it. John McCain told me that. I believe that to this day. Having said that, I'm a practical guy. We're going to work through this, but we're going to deal with the Khashoggi incident until things change in Saudi Arabia. And let's jump right quickly to Syria. Everybody says be realistic about Assad. Do you want to be realistic about Assad? How does Syria move forward if he stays? If Assad stays in Syria with the blessing of the international community after slaughtering 400 to 500,000 of his own people, how do we repair Syria? How do you go to the families that have been murdered by Assad, the relatives, and say, forget about it? Every radical Islamic jihadist will come to Syria because Assad's a puppet of the Iranians. So I want to repair the damage done in Syria, but it gets back to the idea that if Assad stays, I think you never can. So my point here is, let's be real. If you want to fix Syria, you've got to tell the Syrian people they're going to have a new leader.
If you want to fix Lebanon at this point, don't withhold Lebanese U.S. aid. What lay behind the recent withholding of aid?
I don't know, but I'm going to try to go back and get the aid going back to the military. The Lebanese military, with all their problems, is still a good bet for the United States. The people of Lebanon are very cultured, they're very educated, it is screwed up, and I hope they can repair the damage. But now is not the time, in my view, to withhold aid from the Lebanese military. We do want to change the environment on the ground. The bottom line is I think we made a strategic mistake by cutting off aid to the Lebanese military, and I'd like to get it flowing again.
On the issue of Ukraine, was it appropriate to withhold military aid, sir?
After the election of Mr. Zelensky, I mean, we live in interesting times. He's never ran for office before. He was a comedian, and now he's president. He's doing a pretty good job, by the way. So the idea of withholding aid until we knew more about the president of Ukraine, the newly elected president, made sense. But how did the aid get turned on? This story gets lost. On September the 10th, I informed the White House that I was going to vote with Dick Durbin's amendment to make sure that aid started flowing again past September the 30th to Ukraine. And I was going to bring 4 Republicans with me. The administration would have lost that vote. I think that's why the aid was restarted. Corruption in the Ukraine is a real problem. We give hundreds of millions of dollars. It's okay to ask questions, but I am glad the aid is flowing.
Is it okay, ever okay, for an American president to ask a foreign leader to investigate a political rival?
I think being a political rival is not you can't ever be asked questions. Now, Joe Biden is a dear friend. I've traveled all over the world with Joe Biden. He's running for president on the Democratic side. I think he'll do very well. The bottom line is his son was receiving $50,000 a month from a gas company run by the most corrupt guy in the Ukraine. And about 2 months after they raided the gas company's president's home, they fired the prosecutor. Yeah, I think it's okay to talk about this kind of stuff.
I just wonder if Barack Obama had called a foreign leader and asked him to investigate, for example, John McCain or Mitt Romney, what you would have done. My sense is you'd have probably gone ballistic, wouldn't you?
Well, if John McCain's son was getting $50,000 a month from a gas company, I don't think I'd said much about it. So here's the deal. Three Democratic senators wrote a letter to the Ukrainian government that if you don't cooperate with Bob Mueller, it will jeopardize the relationship. So it's okay for a Democrat to tell the Ukrainian government, you got to work with Mueller, who's looking at Trump, but it's not okay for somebody to suggest that maybe you look at all things corruption in the Ukraine. I don't know where this goes, but I know impeachment will be over soon. I supported the Mueller investigation, by the way, for those who care about domestic politics. I didn't know what Trump had done with the Russians. What have I come to believe? There is no collusion between the Trump campaign and the Russians. If you're not colluding with your own government, why do you think you're colluding with the Russians? The president's not much of a colluder. So the bottom line here is that Mueller spent 2 years and $25 million looking at all things Trump and Russia, and now we're impeaching the President of the United States. Bipartisan people, no outside counsel involved. This thing will come to the Senate, and it will die quickly, and I will do everything I can to make it die quickly.
I just wonder how quickly. Let's do a little bit on procedure. There's a debate ongoing about how a trial should be held in the Senate, including whether to have live witnesses. You don't support live witnesses. Why?
I want this to end as quick as possible for the good of the Senate, for the good of the country. And I think the best thing for America to do is get this behind us. We know how it's going to end, so we can focus on the problems we talked about today. If you don't like President Trump, you can vote against him in less than a year. It's not like a politician is unaccountable if you don't impeach him. So I think impeachment is going to end quickly in the Senate. I would prefer it to end as quickly as possible. Use the record that was assembled in the House to pass impeachment articles as your trial record. I don't want to call anybody. I don't need to hear from Hunter Biden. I don't need to hear from Joe Biden. We can deal with that outside of impeachment. I don't want to talk to Pompeo. I don't want to talk to Pence. I want to hear the House make their case based on the record they established in the House, and I want to vote.
The Senate has a constitutional duty in holding this trial and comprehensively evaluating the case. Agree?
No, it doesn't say that in the Constitution. It says that the Senate will dispose. I am trying to give a pretty clear signal. I have made up my mind. I'm not trying to pretend to be a fair juror here. I'm telling you right now, if Mueller had found something against Trump, I'd have been his loudest critic, and I told the president to his face. So what I see happening today is just a partisan nonsense.
You have voiced strong opinions about this impeachment case, but you are, along with the rest of your Senate fellows, jurors. Is it appropriate to be voicing your opinion even before this gets to the Senate as a trial?
Well, I must think so, because I'm doing it. So, this is a political exercise by politicians. When you look at the history of why you have impeachment in the Constitution, what I am saying is that I view this as a political exercise. I view this to be more about Nancy Pelosi's speakership than wrongdoing by President Trump, and I like Speaker Pelosi. I want to congratulate her for negotiating the USMCA trade deal as they impeached the president. I think that's quite a feat both for her and President Trump. So I see the whole process in the House dangerous to the presidency. Every other impeachment except this one was generated by outside counsel, people who are nonpartisan. This is being driven by people who are partisan politicians, no real ability to defend yourself. Most of it's hearsay, closed-door hearings, no right to confront the witnesses against you. I want to make sure that this process is soundly rejected in the Senate, because I think it's a danger to the presidency itself.
Can I just underline what we've been talking about here? Whether or not the president is impeached and removed, you clearly don't think that's going to happen. Is it ever appropriate for a president to ask a foreign leader to get involved in a domestic
You read the phone call, I'm okay with it. You ran against corruption. There's some people believe, and CNN and other groups have not lifted a finger to look. if Mike Pence's son had done this, I think you may have a little more looking by the media. Can you imagine if Mike Pence's son was on a board in the Ukraine, making $50,000 a month, not knowing anything about gas, and the prosecutor's fired if Mike Pence's son calls the State Department? You might want to know a little bit more about that. I love Joe Biden, but nobody's above scrutiny. We're not going to have a country where only Republicans are looked at. I would suggest that Donald Trump and his family have been scrutinized. So to my Democratic friends, it's okay, I guess, to look at everything Trump all the time. It never ends. Don't complain when it comes your way.
Let me ask you two very brief questions. I'm going to combine them together because we have actually run out of time, but I know that the audience will be enjoying this. Do you think President Trump is misunderstood by foreign leaders? And what is something about President Trump that the world should know, sir?
He's got a great sense of humor. He's really, I don't know how he puts up with all this. I didn't vote for President Trump. I voted for a guy that I wouldn't know if he walked in the door. I don't like it when President Trump criticizes John McCain. There's a lot of his tweets I don't like. There are a lot of things he says or does I don't like. I've come to know him. What should you know you don't know? He's very curious. He asks a lot of questions. He wants to know how things work and what makes people tick in the world. How have I come to be so close? We play golf. We have a lot of fun. He's trying to sell me a condo all the time. He's constantly engaged, and I want world leaders to know that he's curious about you, and I'm sure he asks other people other than me. But the fact that he's brought me in his orbit, that he confides in me, that we talk about Syria. Here's the one thing I want world leaders to know. Donald Trump will change his mind if you can convince him. That, to me, is a great quality. And the one thing you need to know, you underestimate this guy at your own peril.
So you no longer believe, as you did during the 2016 campaign, that Donald Trump is a shallow, race-baiting, xenophobic, a religious bigot, and a complete idiot when it comes to Middle East policy?
Good question. I said all of those things. Clearly, I wasn't a fan of his campaign, right? But here's the way it has to work. When you lose, accept it. The American people didn't believe that. They made him their president. When President Obama won, John McCain and Lindsey Graham went to Chicago to talk with President-elect Obama about what could we do. We worked on immigration together. We worked on foreign policy together. And I can tell you all the things I said about President Obama. The great thing about democracy is elections clear the air and you start over. I'm the senator from South Carolina. I said that as candidate for President Lindsey Graham. I got 1%. Clearly, nobody was listening to what I had to say. The bottom line is I owe it to the people of South Carolina to work with President Donald Trump because he is the president of my country. He is the leader of my party. It was an easy transition for me to end the campaign and talking about governing. Some people in Washington have a hard time ending the 2016 campaign. So here's what you can expect from me. If I think he's wrong, I'll say so. I didn't hold back when it came to Syria, and I didn't hold back when it came to Afghanistan, because I believe passionately that the best way I can help President Trump is to tell him what I think. Syria is not sand. Syria is an important country in a troubled region. I want to, like every American, get our troops home, but they can't come home unless we're safe. And I'll end with this. We need walls along our southern border in some places to make it harder to illegally cross into America. There is no wall between us and the Mideast. There is no wall between us and the threat that everybody in this room faces from radical Islamic extremism. So when the president tells me he wants to leave, I tell him, Mr. President, we must stay to partner with our friends in the region who reject this radical ideology. And I don't know when this war is going to be over, but I can tell you how it ends. There'll come a day when people within the region can reject this hateful ideology without being killed, when the rule of law will replace the rule of gun, when a young woman will have more say about her children. Until that day comes, it's incumbent upon the United States to be seen as a reliable ally, to partner with people in the region militarily, economically, and diplomatically. To my friends from Qatar, to my friends from the region, the people who want to kill you want to kill me. If the radical Islamists have to pick between me and you and Israeli, they pick you first, because you will not accept their view of the faith. They hate you more than they hate me. This war we're in, ladies and gentlemen, is a war against good and evil. So President Trump will get my full and complete support in 2020. I hope he gets a second term. And as long as I'm the senator from South Carolina, I will speak truth to power and help him come up with policies that make us all safer. Thank you for having me.
Senator Lindsey Graham, everybody. Thank you, sir.